She looked me in the eye and said, "Dad, we need $280,000, and we need it by Friday." Then her husband nodded like he was confirming a business transaction. I smiled, told them I'd take care of it, and walked them to the door. 4 hours later, I was in a cab to Pearson International. When they showed up at my house Friday morning, they found a locked door and a manila envelope taped to it. My daughter started screaming before she even finished reading the first page. Let me back up. I spent 31 years working for the City of Toronto, water infrastructure, mostly. Not glamorous work, but honest. I retired at 63 with a decent pension, a paid-off house in Scarborough, and enough in my RRSP to live comfortably without bothering anyone. My wife, Donna, passed from ovarian cancer 6 years ago. That was the hardest thing I've ever survived. After she was gone, my daughter became the center of my world. She was all I had left that mattered. Her name is Fiona. She's 34. She has 2 children, a boy 8 years old, and a girl who just turned 6. Those 2 kids are the reason I get up in the morning. Every Saturday I drove out to Mississauga to pick them up, take them to the park, make them grilled cheese sandwiches on the cast iron skillet Donna used to use. The boy likes dinosaurs. The girl likes to paint. I kept a tin of watercolors in my kitchen drawer just for her. Fiona married Brendan 9 years ago. I'll be honest, I had doubts from the beginning. Not because he was a bad person exactly, but because he had a restlessness about him. A way of looking at every situation like it was beneath what he deserved. He worked in sales, switched companies every 18 months or so, always had a reason why the last place didn't recognize his potential. Fiona defended him every time. I kept my mouth shut. It wasn't my marriage. The first time they asked me for money was 4 years ago. Brendan had left his job, quit actually, not laid off, to pursue what he called a consulting practice. He had 2 clients lined up, he said. A real opportunity. They just needed a bridge loan to get through the transition, $25,000. I gave it to them. No contract, no timeline. I gave it because Fiona cried on the phone and because I thought of Donna, who always said family first, no questions asked. I told myself it was a gift, not a loan, so I'd never feel resentful waiting to be paid back. The consulting practice lasted 7 months. Brendan went back into sales. 18 months after that, they called again. This time it was the mortgage. They'd refinanced 2 years earlier to do renovations, a deck, a new kitchen, some landscaping. And now the payments were too high and they were 3 months behind. $38,000 to get current and restructure. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I called my financial advisor, a fellow named Paul who I've known since the 90s, and he told me quietly that I should be careful, that money given to children without legal structure almost always creates problems. I gave it to them anyway. $50,000 this time because Fiona said there were some other smaller debts that needed clearing as well. I told myself it was the last time. It was not the last time. About 14 months ago, Brendan called me, not Fiona, Brendan himself, which should have told me something, and asked if we could meet for lunch downtown. He took me to a place on King Street, nicer than he could afford, and over a $22 bowl of soup, he explained his new venture, cryptocurrency arbitrage. He'd been doing it quietly for 8 months, he said, and the returns were exceptional. He had a partner, someone he'd met through a former colleague, and they had a system. They just needed capital to scale. He wanted me to invest $200,000. I put down my spoon. I looked at him across the table and I thought about the deck on their house that I had paid for, and the kitchen with the quartz countertops, and Fiona's designer coat that I'd seen hanging in their front hallway last Christmas. I thought about how Brendan drove a lease vehicle. He changed every 2 years. I thought about my grandchildren, and whether they had Aries bees. I told him I needed time to think. What I actually did was call Paul that afternoon. Paul spent 20 minutes explaining to me, very patiently, that what Brendan had described sounded less like arbitrage and more like a high-risk scheme built around someone else's algorithm that Brendan did not understand and could not verify. Paul said the word Ponzi once, quietly, and then didn't say it again. I called Brendan the next day and told him I wasn't interested. Fiona didn't speak to me for 6 weeks. When she finally called, She didn't apologize. She said I was being closed-minded, that I didn't trust her judgment, that Brendan was trying to build something for their family, and I was the one person who could help and had chosen not to. I told her I loved her, and I was sorry she felt that way. 3 months later, the scheme collapsed. Brendan lost $40,000 of their own money, money I didn't know they had, which made me wonder what else I didn't know. And apparently the partner disappeared. There were debts to 2 private lenders. The total, including interest and penalties, was somewhere north of $280,000. That's when they came to see me, on a Sunday. They dressed nicely, which I noticed, and Brendan brought a folder with printed documents, loan agreements, account statements, a letter from a collections firm. Fiona sat on my couch in the living room, in the chair where Donna used to read, and told me that if I didn't help them, they would lose the house. I said I understood the situation was very serious. Brendan said, "We need $280,000, Arthur, by Friday." Just like that. Not, "Could you help us?" Not, "We're asking you, we need it by Friday," like he was confirming a pickup time. I looked at Fiona. She looked back at me, and her expression was, and this is the part I keep coming back to, her expression was expectant, not desperate, not ashamed. Expectant. Like this was the obvious conclusion to the meeting, and we were just waiting for me to confirm. I asked where the children were. She said they were at Brendan's mother's place. I said, "Good." I asked if either of them wanted tea. Brendan said no. Fiona said yes, and then changed her mind. I told them I would take care of it. I said I needed a couple of days to liquidate some things, and arranged a transfer. I told them not to worry. Brendan shook my hand at the door. Fiona hugged me, and for a second, I felt her relax against me the way she used to when she was small, when she'd fall asleep on my shoulder watching hockey. I held on to that for a moment. Then I closed the door and stood in my front hallway for a long time. I went to my kitchen. I made tea. I didn't drink. I stood at the window looking out at the backyard, at the garden Donna had planted, and I'd been maintaining for 6 years without knowing what half the plants were called. I thought about the $75,000 I'd already given them. I thought about my pension, which was real and reliable. I thought about my RRSP, which was enough but not infinite. I thought about the watercolor tin in the kitchen drawer and the boy who liked dinosaurs. I thought about what Fiona had said when Brendan's scheme fell apart. She'd said, "Dad, he made a mistake. You don't abandon family for a mistake." And I'd agreed. I'd said, of course not. But what I was only now letting myself understand was that to Fiona, not abandoning family had only ever meant one thing: writing the check. I went upstairs. I opened my laptop. I looked at my accounts for a long time. Then I called Paul. Not to move money. To ask him one question: if I wanted to set aside funds specifically and legally for my grandchildren's education, completely separate from anything their parents could access, how would I do that? He told me about informal in-trust accounts. He told me I could open one at my bank with each grandchild named as beneficiary. He told me the money would be theirs, not Fiona's, not Brendan's. I thanked him and hung up. I spent the next 2 days doing 3 things. First, I went to the bank and opened 2 in-trust accounts, one for each grandchild. I put $40,000 in each one. I named my brother-in-law as secondary trustee in case something happened to me. Then I wrote letters to both children, sealed them, and left them with my lawyer with instructions to give them each a copy when they turned 18. Second, I called my brother-in-law, Donna's younger brother, who lives in Victoria. I told him what had happened. All of it, including the parts I'd been too embarrassed to tell anyone. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Come out here for a while." I said, "Maybe." He said, "Not maybe. Come." Third, I wrote a letter to Fiona. I've started that letter a dozen times in my head since Sunday, and I didn't know how it would come out. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. I still write by hand when it matters, and I wrote for almost 2 hours. I told her about her mother, about the year Donna got sick, and how we'd sat at the same table, and she'd made me promise that whatever happened, I wouldn't let grief make me small. I told Fiona about the money I'd already given them, all of it, because I realized she might not know the total. Brendan had been the one to ask most times, and I wasn't sure how much she knew. I told her I had reached the end of what I could do without destroying the financial security that was meant to carry me through old age. And then I wrote the part that was hardest. I told her that I wasn't disappearing because I didn't love her. I told her I was stepping back because I had finally understood that my presence, specifically my money, my availability, my inability to say no to her face, had become part of the problem, that every time I'd covered a consequence, I had made it easier for the next mistake to happen. That this was not her fault entirely, and it was not entirely mine, but that something had to change, and I was the only one in a position to change it. I told her the children were taken care of. I didn't give details. I told her that whatever happened to the house, her children's education was secure, and that she could hold on to that. I told her I loved her. I always would. I folded the letter, put it in a manila envelope with a smaller sealed envelope addressed to Brendan, and taped the whole thing to my front door. Brendan's envelope contained one page. It said, "I will not be providing the funds. The decision is final. Please do not contact my family members or my financial institutions. Arthur." That night, I packed a bag. Not everything, just what I'd need for a few weeks. My good rain jacket, a couple of books, the fishing photograph from the fridge. It's a picture of me and Donna's father from about 25 years ago, standing on a dock somewhere in Muskoka, both of us holding up catches that weren't actually that impressive. I've kept it on the fridge for years. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because, in the photo, we both look like men who are exactly where they're supposed to be. I took out the SIM card from my cell phone. I have a secondary number, a landline that forwards to a cell, something I'd set up years ago for a rental property I used to own. I wrote that number on a piece of paper and left it with my neighbor, Carolyn, along with my spare key and a note explaining I'd be away for a while. Carolyn is 71 and has lived next door for 22 years. She didn't ask questions. She gave me a container of butter tarts for the flight. I took a cab to Pearson at 5 in the morning. The flight to Victoria is about 5 hours. I had a window seat. Somewhere over the prairies, with the clouds below me flat and bright, I thought about Fiona standing at my door reading that letter. I thought about the anger. There would be a lot of anger. I knew her well enough to know that anger would come first, that grief, if grief came, would come much later. I thought about the children. The boy at Brennan's mother's house, probably watching something on a tablet. The girl, maybe painting. I thought about whether they would understand any of this when they were older. I thought about the letters I'd left with my lawyer, and what it would mean to them at 18 to read something their grandfather had written at 67, trying to explain the distance. My brother-in-law picked me up at the airport. He's 62, retired from teaching, and has a house in Saanich with a vegetable garden that puts mine to shame. He handed me a coffee in the arrivals hall and didn't say much. We drove through the city toward the water, and I watched the Douglas firs go past the window and felt, for the first time in I don't know how long, that I could breathe all the way down. The first week was quiet. I went on walks. I cooked dinner. I read the books I brought. I thought about Fiona constantly, not with guilt exactly, but with a kind of ache that I expect will never fully go away, because she is my daughter, and I have loved her since the moment I first held her, and none of what happened between us changes that. I did not contact her. She found Carolyn's number eventually. Carolyn told her I was safe, and that I'd asked not to be disturbed, and left it there. Fiona called twice more. Carolyn relayed the messages. I listened and did not respond. After 3 weeks, I called my lawyer and told him to send Fiona a letter on my behalf. It was brief. It said I was in good health, that I would be in touch when I was ready, and that the information about the children's funds would be provided through him whenever Fiona wanted to ask. She asked the next day. My lawyer told me she cried when she heard the amount. Not because it was insufficient. I believe she cried because she understood, maybe for the first time, that I had been thinking about the children separately from the debt. That, in the middle of everything, I had made sure they were okay. It took another 2 months before she called me directly. I was ready by then, I answered. She didn't apologize right away. That's not Fiona's way, and I've made my peace with it." She was quiet for a while, and then she said, "I didn't know it had gotten that bad with him. I thought I knew, but I didn't know all of it." I believed her. I still believe her. There's a difference between a woman who participated in taking advantage of her father and a woman who trusted the wrong person for too long. I'm not sure Fiona fully knows which one she was, and that's a question only she can answer. What I know is that she is getting counseling now, that she and Brendan are separated, and she has moved with the children into a smaller rental in Etobicoke, that she has gone back to work. She has a background in accounting. She'd stopped when the kids were born, and her employer has been flexible with her hours. I know these things because she tells me, carefully, a little at a time, like she is not yet sure how much space she has been given back. I returned to Scarborough in November. My house was exactly as I'd left it, which sounds obvious but felt significant. Carolyn had watered the plants. The watercolor tin was still in the kitchen drawer. Fiona brought the children over on a Saturday in December. The girl painted 3 pictures in a row and lined them up on the kitchen table very seriously, considering each one. The boy told me everything he'd learned about ankylosaurs since August, which was substantial. I made grilled cheese sandwiches. We didn't talk about any of it. Not the money, not Brendan, not the months of silence. There would be time for that. There would be many more Saturdays. I don't know how to wrap this up neatly, because it doesn't wrap up neatly. I am not the hero of this story, and I'm not the villain of it either. I made mistakes along the way, gave too easily, said yes when no would have been kinder, let things go on too long because I didn't want to face the conversation. My daughter made mistakes too. Her husband made more than his share, but I am 67 years old. I worked for 31 years. I buried my wife, and I have learned, slowly and at some cost, that love is not the same as endlessness, that you can love someone completely and still say, here is the line, here is where I stop, not because you've given up on them, but because you finally understood that staying was doing neither of you any good. The fishing photograph is back on the fridge. It was the first thing I put back up when I got home. I look at it sometimes in the morning when I'm waiting for the kettle. 2 men on a dock, the water behind them, both of them squinting a little in the sun. Neither of us famous, neither of us extraordinary, just men who had worked hard and loved their families and were standing somewhere beautiful for a moment, not asking for anything more than that. That's all I ever wanted, really, to be that man on the dock. I think I still can be. I keep thinking about that kitchen table. How many times I sat at it and said yes when I should have said nothing at all, or at least asked more questions. Not because I was weak, but because I confused love with rescue. I told myself I was protecting Fiona. What I was actually doing for years was protecting her from the kind of discomfort that teaches you who you really are. That's the thing nobody warns you about when your children are small. You spend so much energy keeping them from falling that you forget falling is how they learn to get back up. Brendan's failures were his own. The quit jobs, the scheme, the $40,000 gone, but every time I stepped in and smoothed the ground, I made it easier for the next stumble to happen. Cause and effect doesn't care about good intentions. The outcome is the outcome. What I had to reckon with, sitting on that plain west of Thunder Bay with the prairies spread out below me, is that I had played a part in this too. Not because I loved too much. I don't think that's possible. But because I acted on that love without wisdom. There's a difference between a generous instinct and a thoughtful one. I had plenty of the first and not nearly enough of the second. Fiona is smart. She always has been. She has a mind for numbers. She can look at a column of figures and find the error in 30 seconds flat. Always could, even as a teenager doing her homework at this same table. But somewhere along the way, she stopped applying that mind to her own life, stopped questioning what Brendan told her, stopped asking the hard questions. I think she was tired. I think she'd been managing him for years, and it wore something down in her. And I think, in some honest corner of herself, she knew that if things fell apart completely, I would catch them. So the questions felt less urgent. That has to change. Not because I'm withholding love, but because the only version of Fiona I want to see across from me at this table is the one who trusts her own judgment. The one who earns her own footing and stands on it. That Fiona was always there. She just needed the net to be gone before she'd stop looking down at it. The children are the part that steadies me when the doubt gets loud. I know I did right by them. Whatever happens between Fiona and me, whatever the slow work of repair looks like over the coming months and years, those two kids have a foundation that no one can touch. That was something I could actually do. Not bail out a sinking scheme, but quietly, without announcement, make sure their futures weren't swallowed by someone else's mistakes. That felt true. That felt like something Donna would have recognized. I'm not looking for credit for any of it. I'm not looking for Fiona to thank me, or Brendan to understand, or anyone outside this house to know what happened here. I just wanted to make a decision I could live with at 67, sitting in a quiet kitchen in Scarborough, waiting for the kettle, a decision I could look at straight on. The photograph is back on the fridge. I look at it every morning now. Two men on a dock, squinting into the sun, holding fish that aren't really worth bragging about. Both of them looking like they know exactly where they are. That's enough. That has always been enough.